Hello. So in this video, we're going to talk about the poetry of Yehuda HaLevi, whom I'm reading out of Norton Anthology of World Literature. So HaLevi was an 11th to 12th century poet. He was a Jewish poet living in Moorish Spain. And this is actually, I love this actually, because throughout my sort of adult life, ever since 2001, where a particular incident occurred, in the West, in the United States in particular, but in portions of Western Europe especially as well, there's been a major anti-Islamic or Islamophobic bias. And one of the things that has meant has been this continual characterization of Islamic cultures and of Islam as such as an inherently repressive and violent, unaccepting, bigoted culture or religion, theology. And certainly there are many, many, many problems with Islam, especially in the Middle East. But there are many, many problems with Christianity in the United States. So, but the thing that I always find fascinating is to go back to this sort of period of the Islamic Golden Age, the sort of period roughly in the late medieval period, according to sort of European history, right? So sort of 9th century through really sort of the Crusades era, where things start to change a little bit. Because at that point, Islam and Islamic cultures, regimes, governments, whatever it was, were incredibly tolerant. They were much more tolerant of religious differences than European Christianity was. So again, and that in itself is not that important necessarily, but what it illustrates, of course, is the accidents of history, right? History is irony and tragedy, and in this case, we have a Jewish poet living in a Muslim-dominated country that has a large Christian population, a large Jewish population, a large Muslim population, all living together in relative peace. I say relative peace because European Christians did continually or periodically attempt to reconquer Spain. And one of the things that's interesting about HaLevi is that he writes in these sort of Arabic-inspired poems, but he writes them in Hebrew. So as the introduction, as the editors say, he used Hebrew as a literary language in a period where Arabic was the standard written language for Muslims, Christians, and Jews alike. HaLevi reinvented Arabic literary forms into a distinctly Hebrew idiom. So it is a blending, it is a hybridization, reflecting the ability of different religions, different creeds, different people of different backgrounds to coexist peacefully and creatively within the world. So, along those lines, I actually think that's a sort of interesting way of framing it, if I do say so myself, having been the one who just framed it that way, because one of the things that we see in the two poems in this collection from HaLevi is the blending of opposites, right? The blending of things, the combining of things paradoxically that seem to reflect opposition to one another. So the first poem, I think, is actually the more interesting one in this case. I actually think I like this first poem in here more than the second one. And this poem is to Ibn al-Mulalim, which is, I guess, directed to a real person. It is a love poem. So this is it. To Ibn al-Mulalim, gently, my hard-hearted slender one, be gentle with me and I'll bow before you. I've ravished you only in looking, my heart is pure but not my eyes. They'd gather from your features the roses and lilies mingled there. I'd lift the fire from your cheeks to put out fire with fire. And then when I was thirsty, it's there I'd look for water. I'd savor the lip that glows like ruby, like coals in the tongs of my jaws. My life hangs by scarlet threads. My death is now concealed in dusk. I find that nights have no end, for once no dark divided my days. For time then was clay in the hands and fortune of the potter's wheel. So we get all, like, throughout the early portion of this poem, the first 10 lines or so, we have these sort of pairings of images or ideas that seem contradictory. Gently, my hard-hearted, slender one, in the first line. So we have gently with hard-hearted, right? Softness, yieldingness, comfort with roughness, stridency, unwaveringness, right? These seemingly opposite qualities linked within the line. And yes, they are not qualities that are both ascribed to the beloved, but they are linked within the same line, right? By the request of the poet persona for gentleness, with the acknowledgement that the nature of the beloved is to be hard-hearted. Then a little bit later on, we get this idea, my heart is pure, but not my eyes, right? Purity and impurity merged within the poet persona, blending those two elements. A little bit later, we have the images of roses and lilies linked to fire. The roses and lilies mingled there in your features. I'd lift the fire from your cheeks. So, I mean, these aren't necessarily contradictory images, though if you light a flower on fire, that's not good for that flower, but they are differing, very, very much differing poetic images, right? These are common standard images in love poetry, right? Flowers tend to represent sort of gentleness and beauty. Fire tends to represent passion and desire, right? And so they're connected in that sense, but they are differing elements that do different things. They stand for different virtues or characteristics within the economy of love poetry imagery. And then we go from to put out fire with fire, and then when I was thirsty, it's there I'd look for water. So we go from the beloved's face is associated with flowers to fire to water over the course of these lines, right? We go from fire to water. Specifically, I would put out fire with fire, and then I would quench my thirst. So again, what's going on here is very paradoxical in that it represents these sort of competing imagistic ideas, and yet they are all sort of coalescing around this single figure of the beloved and the intended relationship between the poet persona and the beloved. We then have sets of colored imagery. The ruby, the glowing coals in the tongs of my jaws, my life hangs by a scarlet thread, right? So this red imagery, this sort of repeated motif over 3 lines of 3 things that are going to be red. The coals, coals are black in and of themselves, but glowing like coals is going to be a red and orange sort of color, right? So we have ruby, glowing coals, scarlet threads. Red, of course, traditionally reflecting passion, love, etc., right? These sort of very positive components of the desire for the beloved. But then we go from my life hangs by scarlet threads to my death is now concealed in dusk. So we go from life to death. And associated with death over the next 3 lines, we have dusk, nights, dark. So again, we have over 3 lines, we have 3 images associated with darkness, blackness, obscurity. And darkness tends to symbolize within it loss, right? It is a poetic device that reflects loss, suffering, deprivation, the inability to find one's way, etc., etc. So we go from the red imagery, red color scheme of passion and love to the black color scheme of loss and suffering. And then the final 2 lines bring this theme together with, again, another very traditional poetic image. For time then was clay in my hands, and fortune the potter's wheel. So the wheel of fortune image is an incredibly pervasive one throughout literary culture and throughout philosophy, right? Because the idea is basically things change. Today things are good, tomorrow things will be bad, or vice versa, right? Today I suffer, but tomorrow I shall be exalted. This idea of change over time, the turning of fortune's wheel in which one's fortune is lifted up to a peak of prosperity and then comes down to the depths of suffering, right? And it is an image that embodies and conveys these contrasts, right? So we have fire and flowers. We have life and death. We have love and darkness, etc., combined by the thematic of the Wheel of Fortune, the turn of time and the changeability of the universe, right? So I think that's really, really cool. I think it's an awesome poem. The other poem that's in here is called Lord, and it deals with similar sorts of thematics, but I don't think it's as interesting. At least for me, it's not. So we do in this have a religious poem, but it is a poem that's still focused on sort of bringing together these seemingly opposite things and working through them as a sort of balance in the world.